My 14-year-old sister lost her virginity. Now I'm torn between protecting her and my own life. Lily had always been my shadow. Ever since she was little, she followed me everywhere, copying the way I dressed, repeating the phrases I used, even mimicking the way I laughed. It used to annoy me, but over time I grew to love it. She was my little sister, my responsibility, my best friend. But that all started to change when she turned 14. At first, it was small things. She stopped asking to borrow my clothes, opting instead for outfits I didn't recognize. Tight jeans, crop tops, and shoes with heels that made her wobble like a newborn deer. She started spending more time in the bathroom, the door locked as she experimented with makeup she'd bought with her allowance. And then there was the phone. It was always in her hand, her thumbs flying across the screen as she giggled at messages I wasn't allowed to see. "Who are you texting all the time?" I asked one evening, trying to sound casual as I leaned over her shoulder. "No one," she said quickly, pulling the phone to her chest. Her cheeks flushed, and she avoided my eyes, a telltale sign that she was lying. I wanted to press her, to demand answers and remind her that she could talk to me about anything. But I didn't. Instead, I let it go, telling myself it was just a phase. She was growing up, testing boundaries, finding her own identity. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was a distance between us now, one that hadn't been there before, and I didn't know how to bridge it. One night, I heard her bedroom door creak open long after everyone else had gone to sleep. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and listened as her footsteps padded down the hallway and out the front door. For a moment, I considered letting her go, pretending I hadn't noticed. But the thought of her out there alone in the dark was enough to make me throw off the covers and follow her. I found her in the park, sitting on a bench under the dim glow of a street lamp. She wasn't alone. A boy I didn't recognize sat beside her, his arms slung casually over her shoulders. They were talking in low voices, their heads close together, and even from a distance, I could see the way Lily looked at him, like he was the sun and she was a flower turning toward his light. I wanted to interrupt, to march over there and drag her back home. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she smiled, so carefree and happy, like she didn't have a worry in the world. Or maybe it was the way the boy looked at her, like she was something precious and fragile. Whatever it was, I stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as they stood up and walked hand in hand toward the trees. My stomach twisted into knots, and I felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it took my breath away. But I didn't stop them. I couldn't, because in that moment, I realized that Lily wasn't a little girl anymore. She was growing up, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The next morning, Lily was quiet, her usual bubbly self replaced by a somberness that made my chest ache. She avoided my eyes, picking at her breakfast like she had something to hide. I wanted to ask her what had happened, to demand answers and make sure she was okay. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in silence, my mind racing with questions I was too afraid to ask. After that night in the park, I tried to talk to Lily. I really did. I waited for the right moment, when we were alone in the kitchen or sitting on the couch watching TV, and I asked her how she was doing, if there was anything she wanted to talk about. But every time, she brushed me off with a smile and a shrug. "I'm fine," she would say, her voice light and airy, like she didn't have a care in the world. "Why do you keep asking?" I didn't know how to answer that. How could I explain the knot of worry in my stomach, the way my heart raced every time I thought about her sneaking out at night? How could I tell her that I was scared, not just for her, but for us, for the bond we used to share that was slipping through my fingers like sand? So I didn't. Instead, I watched her from a distance, my eyes following her every move, my ears straining to catch every whispered conversation and muffled laugh. I told myself it was just curiosity, just a big sister looking out for her little sister. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was searching for something, some clue that would help me understand what was happening to her. The boy's name was Jake. I learned that much from eavesdropping on Lily's phone calls, though I never let her know I was listening. He was older than her, maybe 16 or 17, with a cocky grin and a swagger that made my skin crawl. I didn't like him, not one bit, but I couldn't deny the way Lily lit up whenever she talked about him. She was infatuated, maybe even in love, and it scared me more than I cared to admit. One afternoon, I found her sitting on her bed, staring at her phone with a look of pure bliss on her face. I knocked on the doorframe, trying to sound casual as I asked, "What's so interesting?" She jumped, her cheeks flushing as she quickly locked her phone and shoved it under her pillow. "Nothing," she said, her voice too high, too fast. "Just stuff." I wanted to push her, to demand she show me what she was hiding. But I didn't. Instead, I sat down beside her and tried to remember the last time we talked like we used to, back when she was my shadow and I was her hero. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" I said, my voice soft. "No matter what it is, I'll always be here for you." She looked at me then, her eyes wide and uncertain, like she was considering it. But then she looked away, her shoulders slumping as she muttered, "I know." That night, I heard her sneaking out again. This time, I didn't follow her. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with images of her and Jake, of all the things that could go wrong. I wanted to protect her, to keep her safe from the world and from herself. But I didn't know how. The next morning, Lily was different. She was quieter, more withdrawn, and there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She picked at her breakfast, her fork pushing food around her plate without ever lifting it to her mouth. I wanted to ask her what was wrong, to demand answers and make sure she was okay. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in silence, my heart aching with the weight of everything I couldn't say. The days after that night felt like walking through a fog. Lily was quieter than ever, her usual spark dimmed to a faint flicker. She spent more time in her room, the door closed, and when she did come out, she avoided my eyes like I was a stranger. I wanted to shake her, to demand she tell me what was wrong, but I didn't. Instead, I waited, my heart heavy with the weight of everything I couldn't say. Then, one evening, she came to my room. I was sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone, when she appeared in the doorway, her face pale and her hands trembling. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her eyes wide and filled with a fear that made my stomach twist. "Lily," I said, my voice soft. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, her bottom lip quivering as she stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. Then, without warning, she burst into tears. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had something happened with Jake? Had she been hurt? Had she done something she regretted? I stood up and pulled her into my arms, holding her as she sobbed into my shoulder. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Whatever it is, it's going to be okay." But it wasn't okay. I knew that even before she spoke, even before she pulled away and looked at me with eyes that were filled with a pain I couldn't begin to understand. "I slept with him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "With Jake." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air out of my lungs and leaving me gasping for breath. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand she take it back. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in silence, my mind racing with images of her and Jake, of all the things that could have gone wrong. "Are you okay?" I asked finally, my voice shaking. Did he hurt you?" She shook her head, her tears falling faster now. "No," she said. It was my choice. But I didn't think it would feel like this. I didn't know what to say. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, protectiveness, and a strange, aching pride. I wanted to yell at her for being so careless, to hug her and tell her everything would be okay, to find Jake and make him regret ever laying a hand on her. But in the end, all I could do was sit there and hold her as she cried. Now, I'm standing at a crossroads, torn between two worlds. My sister, who is growing up too fast and needs me more than ever, and my husband, who has been patient and understanding but is starting to feel the strain of my divided attention. I don't know who to choose, or if I even have the right to choose. All I know is that no matter what I do, someone will get hurt.